Dr. Vesey is first up for our presentation. He's now retired from a quite distinguished career in public policy. His undergraduate degree is from here at Wichita State University, a master's from the University of Oklahoma, and a PhD from Syracuse University. He worked for decades on the faculty with Utica University in upstate New York, and then at Alabama A&M University. And interestingly, at the start of his career, Dr. Vesey also worked in Wichita for the city of Wichita and also for the Urban League here. For us at the Wichita Art Museum, in addition to all of that, there were two other aspects of his life that for us made him an obvious speaker for today. He's currently at work on a book project and really devoting himself to this in his retirement, called Research on Black Wichita, 1945 to 1958. We acknowledge that he was a Wichita State grad. We didn't say, oh yes, he's a native of Wichita. And he lived here across the span of that history that his book focuses on. And in 1958, and as a teenager, Dr. Vesey was part of the students who so bravely, so courageously protested segregation at the Dockum Drugstore. I myself, in looking back at that time, hard for me to imagine the courage of teenagers to take on something like that. And yet, that was the courage of Dr. Vesey, and I think we're going to see some of that fierce determination in his talk this afternoon. Dr. Vesey.
Anybody that wants to shout hallelujah, now might be an appropriate time to do so. I love it. As I was listening to those kind remarks by Patricia McDonald about the first speaker for this afternoon, the thought occurred to me, boy, I can hardly wait to see what he has to say. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. And may I say that this is truly a distinct privilege and a rare honor to participate in this prestigious community symposium entitled Freedom to Expand, Gordon Parks, one of Kansas's most talented native sons. For those of you who were here for the opening reception on January 30th, you may recall that Mark McCormick shared something confidential between him and his wife. Apparently, Miss McCormick told Mr. McCormick that they would never talk about divorce, but that they might talk about murder if he ever asked her to stand up in public. Not to worry. My wife's name is Rosie Vesey, and she has the most beautiful smile that you have ever seen. Honey, would you please stand and wave to the audience. Like Mark McCormick, I too love the story of Gordon Roger Alexander Buchanan Parks and his many contributions to humanity. And I may also add the names of other justice-seeking and freedom-loving foot soldiers, such as Sojourner Truth, Daisy Gaston Bates, Fannie Lou Hamer, Mary McLeod Bethune, Harriet Tubman, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and still there are more names, such as Reverend James Reeb, age 38, who was born in Wichita, Kansas, and who was a white Unitarian Universalist minister with a wife and 4 children that resided in Boston, and who answered the call from Dr. King to participate in the Selma, Alabama voting rights movement which ultimately resulted in his death after he was severely beaten by white segregationists and died 2 days later on March 11, 1965. Viola Gregg Lauzo, age 39, who was a white mother of 5 children from Detroit and who was shot and killed while shuttling marchers between Montgomery and Selma on March 25, 1965. Little mention is the fact that a black teenager by the name of Leroy Moton, age 19, was riding with Viola when they were attacked by Ku Klux Klan members. Getting hoof and mouth disease here, I think. Ku Klux Klan members in an auto chase along Highway US 80. Moton had reported that Viola was singing "We Shall Overcome" when the attack began, and then she stopped singing and began to sing, "And before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave." Those were her last words. Closer to home, may I add the name Rosie Knight Hughes. She and her husband, Leon Hughes, were both self-taught photographers, not unlike Gordon Parks. And Rosie was the advisor for the Dockum Drugstore sit-in participants. More than once, I learned in later years, she was afraid for our safety, and she prayed for us. And I regret that she's not here. She's not feeling well, but she has been very special in the life of the Dockum participants. Because of the nature of this research, we made a decision to extend the time of inquiry beyond 1945 and 1958. This was done partly to understand the impact of possible forces and events from the past that might have had some influence on the Wichita Black experience as early as 1889 or as late as the mid-1970s. For example, Reverend Dr. Love Henry Welchel argues that the institution of marriage was intended for whites only for almost 400 years. And if you have not done so, I certainly would commend to you the book Slavery by Another Name, written by Douglas Blackman, and other sources that describe convict leasing and forced labor systems. Another example with local implications would be the city-school integration struggle that seemed to have gone on forever. Some of what you will hear this afternoon may seem a little crude or offensive. Where this may be the case, I offer my apologies in advance. The choice of words used or description of illustrations that will be presented whenever necessary are intended solely to preserve their historical context or their significance as implied by other authors or speakers, unless stated as my own responsibility. A view of adversity and strengths of a people. The findings or information that I will draw from here are based on an incomplete manuscript, observations of others outside of this research, and my own personal life experiences. I was born in Wichita, Kansas on May 25th at 1045 Matheson Street. The house still stands, and I have been accustomed to saying that it looks better than me. Today, I'm not so sure. As a rule, during this time, Black childbirths were in private residences. But at no time would a Black patient be admitted in the same hospital room with a white patient, most likely until after World War II. Black Catholics may have had something else going, but that's another story. So, As youth growing up in what has been described as one of the most segregated cities in America, we virtually stood on the shoulders of an awful lot of other people. For example, our parents and families, black teachers, mentors, and community volunteers. It was a time I like to describe as black people spending quality time with other folks' children. But it was also a time of corporal punishment. If we're going to tell the story, we need to tell it all. I was introduced to corporal punishment. One of my favorite teachers would pinch you, slap you. She'd even ball her fists up, and we had a thing where you'd hit somebody in the arm and it would swell up like a rock. We called that a frog. I had another teacher who turned out to be a fraternity brother, who called me up in front of class, about the 4th or 5th grade, and whipped me with a wood tetherball paddle. I can hardly say it today. I went back to my seat. He then spanked a girl, not nearly as severe he'd spanked me, and then he called me back up front and proceeded to whip me again. There's warm tears running down my face. I'm sorry. We had black churches and black social organizations, black schools K through 7 or 8th grade, a black YMCA, YWCA, a black public park with a swimming pool, and of equal significance, there were black businesses, including grocery stores, drugstores, barbershops, hairdressers, restaurants, contractors and carpenters, a movie theater, plumbers, lawyers, doctors, and dentists, black newspapers, hotels, morticians, delivery services, taxi services, ice delivery, trash haulers, radio repair services, and during the 1920s, an all-black professional baseball team, the Wichita Monrovians, named for the capital city of Monrovia, Liberia, in Western Africa. The above resources and strengths would certainly have had a positive impact on black individuals and families that settled in Wichita or other Kansas communities such as Fort Scott. Consider the practices and attitudes the black individuals and their families had to suffer through prior to leaving southern states, whenever they were fortunate to do so. One writer sums up the southern white view toward blacks this way: I am just as opposed to Booker Washington as a voter with all his Anglo-Saxon reinforcements as I am to the coconut-headed, chocolate-colored, typical little coon, Andy Dotson, who blacks my shoes every morning. Neither is fit to perform the supreme function of citizenship. Exactly what influence or how much the Dockum Drugstore sit-ins had on the civil rights struggle in the 1960s and the 1970s is not entirely clear. What is known is that Reverend Wyatt T. Walker was a speaker at the 13th annual dinner meeting of the Wichita Urban League in 1967, and most likely in March or April of that year, reflecting on the renewed sense of urgency among black youth for social justice and black pride. Wyatt T. Walker, who was an aide and colleague of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., paraphrased Stephen Foster's degrading song entitled "Old Black Joe." And to be fair, black teachers taught this song too. Eyes are coming, and my head is bended low. Eyes is old black Joe. Reverend Walker rephrased these degrading lines in this manner: eyes are coming, and my head ain't bended low. Eyes are walking fast and stepping high. Eyes is America's new black Joe. Brenda J. Williams, in 1984, in an essay prepared as a resource for teaching about the Black experience in Kansas, writes, during the bleak years when few advances in civil rights were taking place, blacks seized the opportunities which forced segregation seemed to offer. They enhanced their churches, made education a top family priority, and formed their own self-help groups. They joined clubs and organizations which fought racial discrimination. Perhaps the most effective of these organizations was the NAACP. Reverend James Cleveland sings a song entitled In God's Own Time, which seems to affirm our belief of what faith means in the Black experience. If I can hold out and hold out, if I can keep the faith, in God's own time, my change will come. It will come. If I do my best, if I can pass the test, in God's own time, my change will come. I think at this time in the control room, we're going to change pace, and I have a series of slides for you. Was there one before this one? It's just the title page. Yes, A View of Adversity and Strengths of a People. It seems as though in life, trouble is always just on the other side of strength, and that's an important lesson we should not forget. The period between 1889 and 1958 saw only a smattering of literary attention to the Black experience in Wichita. Racial discrimination may explain some of the inattention to Black Wichitans as illustrated in the passages you're going to hear now. Early racism in Wichita. Okay, we're ready. I won't have as much comment on all of these, but while affection for any group competing for jobs might be cool, attitudes toward minority races became, in the mid-1880s, cold indeed. In the case of the growing prejudice against and housing and occupational segregation of blacks, the explanation was partly growing numbers and a tight struggle for lucrative construction jobs. The increasing number of blacks, however, gave that group some political power. By the summer of 1887, there were 983 black people in the city, and the newspapers contained frequent notices of rallies of black voters. A councilman was once quoted as saying, he would be eternally smashed before any nigger should be elected to an office in Wichita. And by the way, that's from a source by Dr. Craig Minor, the late Willard W. Garvey Distinguished Professor of Business History at Wichita State University. And today we have a new Distinguished Professor of Business History at Wichita State University. Would you stand? Just. Thank you. I know you didn't see that coming. Okay, we're ready. Is Charles McAfee here? Okay. Jacob McAfee. Jacob McAfee was one of the early settlers of Wichita who traveled from Ohio to Wichita with his family in a covered wagon in early 1865 after recuperating from an injury sustained fighting in the Civil War, who acquired considerable land in and outside of Wichita, resulting in a prosperous real estate business, who was elected along with 13 other black Wichitans at a meeting held at St. Paul AME Church on January 19, 1891, to attend a state convention in Topeka, Kansas, to protest proposed legislation favoring separate schools, and who is the great-grandfather of internationally known architect and social activist Charles McAfee. Originally, the black community, it should be said, did not favor all black public schools. The tide changed in favor of separate schools, not so much to avoid whites, but to ensure quality education for black children and competitive employment for black teachers and black administrative personnel. Okay. Wichita Board of Education. The action taken by the Wichita Board of Education on September 17, 1889 to no longer purchase double desks may have been done deliberately to prevent black pupils from sitting next to white children. The Wichita Eagle, on the other hand, comes right out and states that this decision targeted 2 schools with a mixed attendance of white and colored children, Emerson and Parks schools. Albert P. Marble in 1891 may have allowed an additional explanation in his publication entitled Sanitary Conditions for Schoolhouses, and we're going to go to another slide to explain that. This is double desk policy, and there's a caption on the bottom there that Albert P. Marble wrote. Double desk caused the spread of vermin and disease, and the contamination of the peer by close relationship with immoral seatmates. Okay, we're ready. Reverend Holly T. Sims and Virginia Sims, husband and wife, owners and publishers. Reverend Holly T. Sims and wife Virginia Sims and the uncle and aunt of Gloria McAfee published the Negro Star newspaper for 34 years, both in Greenwood, Mississippi and in Wichita, Kansas. The Negro Star served the interests of 28,000 Kansans by printing the news that reflected the lives of black people in churches, communities, and businesses. Virtually the entire Sims family, including Reverend Holly T. Sims and his wife Virginia Sims, were run out of Mississippi by a county sheriff and a committee of white citizens in 1919 because of a newspaper article that the Sims had published which praised America's black troops in World War I. White parents and teachers petitioned Board of Education to not authorize integrated field days. On November 1st, 1920 and December 6, 1920, white parents at elementary school and elementary school teachers asked the Wichita Board of Education to not require athletic competition between pupils of black elementary schools and pupils of white elementary schools. Van Meter writes that perhaps the white parents resented most of all the victory of Ouverture students in the Wichita grade school track meet held in May 1919 with over 1,000 students participating, in which Ouverture dominated and went in overall first place. The overall score for Ouverture was 79 1/3 points, but the Ouverture girls took the day. They made 61 of those points. Now we know why those girls were fast. So there was a heritage there, apparently. Okay. Blacks petitioned Board of Education on behalf of Marion L. Austin to permit black student use of the public school swimming pool. Following the initiative of black student Marion L. Austin and a committee headed by Walter L. Hutcherson, secretary of the black branch of the YMCA, a petition was submitted to the Wichita Board of Education in 1924 requesting that black students be allowed to swim together with the white boys and girls. A few days after the Wichita Board meeting on February 4th, 1924, the board decided that black high school students would be permitted to swim in the pool at Wichita High School. That was on the site of what is now Wichita East High, by the way, on Friday afternoons after the white students had finished swimming and prior to the school being filled with fresh water for the following school week. This practice probably continued until the mid-1940s. Report of the Committee on Findings, the Conference on Race Relations, Wichita, Kansas, 1924, presents discussion on a survey of race relations in Wichita because of the earnest desire of fair-minded white people in Wichita to understand their Negro neighbors. And this was headed by Walter L. Hutcherson. That family did a tremendous service. There was a YMCA named in his honor. He left here and went to Tulsa. They did the same thing down there. They named the YMCA after Walter Hutcherson. So he was very active. And He was the director of the survey. And in addition, Reverend John Wesley Hayes, pastor of Calvary Baptist Church, which was at the site of the present-day Kansas African American Museum. Lack of health care, health education in the black community, lack of employment opportunities in public utilities and labor unions for blacks, need for new addition to the black branch of the YMCA, as well as interest in forming a Negro branch of the YWCA. Increased attendance and academic achievement of black children in all black schools. A core of competent black teachers has emerged commensurate with white public school teachers. And progress was made by Wichita newspapers to print positive articles about blacks rather than headlines about crimes committed in the black community. Couldn't find much information unless it was about somebody in the black community killing somebody else in the black community. Okay. Ku Klux Klan, influence on the Board of Education. Van Meter advises that the Ku Klux Klan had been effective during the 1920s in influencing the Wichita Board of Education, and moreover, between 1915 and 1926, the actions of the Wichita Klan became increasingly bothersome toward blacks and other minority groups. For example, the Klan tried unsuccessfully to prevent black tenor Roland Hayes, and that's an important name we're going to revisit, from performing at Wichita High School between 1925 and 1926. Dr. George Washington Carver was a guest speaker at Friends University in late January or early February of 1930. However, after a speaking engagement by Booker T. Washington in Topeka on January 17, 1905, where he expressed his gratitude to Kansas for the services it had rendered to our race, Booker T. Washington was turned away from hotels in Wichita. He had planned to make a speech in Topeka and then to bring his entourage on to Wichita, and that didn't happen. Okay. Blacks hired to transport pupils to all black schools. The Wichita Board of Education on September 4th, 1928, recommended that 2 black adults be employed to haul, this is a quote, the colored children to all black schools. This meant that many of the black children were probably bused past the boundaries of white public schools on their way to all black schools. This board decision smacks in the face the board preoccupation with a lack of economic resources throughout much of the 19th and 20th century. The Board of Education is no different from most businesses. There was never enough money, but they found $60,000 to build 4 black schools. Ouverture, Dunbar, Grand, and 18th Street, where my mother attended. And then later, what had been Ingalls turned out to be Dunbar, because Ingalls moved presumably to a white community. They never caught on that wherever they go, we follow them, so. At one time, the canal, unless you were going to Augusta or El Dorado, you had no reason to go east of the canal. And then the boundary extended to Hydraulic, and then to Grove, and then to Hillside. They keep running, we keep coming. First black elected to the Wichita Board of Education. In April of 1949, Dr. Hugh N. Sims, the brother of Reverend Holly T. Sims, became the first black person to be elected to the Wichita Board, and he served as board president from approximately 1953 to 1954. Proclamation of the City of Wichita. Proclamation of the City of Wichita, Kansas, August 12, 2008, regarding the successful sit-ins conducted by the Wichita NAACP Youth Council, which led to the integration of segregated lunch counters at Dockum Drugstores and ultimately at lunch counters throughout the state of Kansas. 10 years later, on January 19, 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s voice rang out at Kansas State University in what was to be his last formal address on a college campus. On that cold, crisp day, Dr. King spoke on behalf of the city and participants across the length and breadth of this nation. As he stated, when they sat in, they were in reality standing up for the best in the American dream. How are we doing on time? I should have sat down 5 minutes ago. So you know how we're doing on time? Okay, we might just make it then. This is a very distinguished gentleman by the name of Curtis McClinton Sr. He was born March 22nd, 1913, and went from labor to reward on June 27th. His reward on June 27, 2012. Curtis McClinton Sr. was born in Braggs, Oklahoma. His parents were Wayman and Agnes McClinton. Curtis was the oldest of 5 siblings: Wenzel, Etha May, Deborah, Thelma, Electra, and one child that died at birth. As a child, Curtis Sr. recalled in those days how hard money was to come by. So in order to get money, he picked up potatoes for a nickel in a bushel basket, which he took out in trade. They wouldn't remunerate him by money. He had to go get some groceries. Although there was fundraising to purchase a school for black children, nothing really happened. A drunken judge who was reelected by other drunkards, at least they're consistent and loyal, made promises, and that's as far as it went. Later, he finished high school in Muskogee, Oklahoma. He married Mary Ellen McGee at the age of 23, and they had one son, Curtis Jr. After relocating to Wichita, Curtis Jr. went into real estate and the grocery business and became the first black elected. I'm sorry, I apologize, that was Curtis Sr. This is my typist's fault. And became the first black elected as Kansas State Senator outside of Kansas City, Kansas. There was a Curtis Jr., however, prominent member of the Kansas City Chiefs professional football team that won Super Bowl IV on January 11, 1970, over the Minnesota Vikings, 23-7. After his football career, he became can't blame this on myself, here's my writing now. He became a registered banker and graduated from the Harvard University Kennedy School of Government, served as deputy mayor for economic development in Washington, D.C. Again, this research is about diversity and strength of a people. And there should be one more, yes. This was supposed to be a historical landmark, but it's no longer standing now. It was at 1205 East 12th Street. McClinton Market is representative of the population changes that occurred in the McAdams neighborhood in Wichita during the first half of the 20th century, when the area changed from primarily white residents to over 90% African American by the end of World War II. First built for white business owners in 1920, this small wood frame building was purchased in 1943 by Curtis McClinton Sr., who operated a grocery store there until 1973. In 1956, McClinton became the first black outside of Kansas City area to serve in the Kansas State Legislature. I'm repeating myself, I said that. Okay, I think we have. Okay. This is the Burley Hayes School of Music. And this was a program on September 1st, 1953. We're going to move right along. The Burley School of Music is named after and with the permission of Harry T. Burley, noted Negro composer and director, and Roland Hayes, renowned Negro tenor. The School of Music has cooperated in various programs with national and international organizations in the city and with various interracial religious denominations. The director is affiliated officially with the music work of the public schools, having been appointed by the Wichita Supervisor of Public School Music to instruct class music once weekly. I have to tell you a little short story. I met a gentleman by the name of Willie Capers, Jr., and he was 31 at the time. This was May 15th, 2014. And he flashed back to June 1967 when he was a student of Margery King I blocked. Last name. Not yet. Last name. Well, okay. Margery Knight Esters.
Well, actually, it was Kim.
Okay. Nevertheless, Miss King was giving him a pep talk about the importance of striving for excellence and furthering his artistic career. And she told him a story about when she was on a city bus in Wichita, and there was a white lady with her daughter who turned to her mother and said, "Mother, look, there's a nigger." But she wanted to impact on him that he really needed to pursue his career and get on with the business of serving humanity. We are very blessed and fortunate that Margery Kelly King has a daughter who is with us today. And I'm going to ask Barry Jean Esters and her family to please stand. Thank you all so much. At that time, the King house and her studio was located at 1248 Wabash, right across the street, 1249 Wabash. Right across the street was St. Mary's Baptist Church, and I was a member there, and every Sunday when you'd come out, there'd be music, beautiful music in the air. So I always felt something special about that service and humanity. Well, okay. There's a photograph of Burley and Roland Hayes. This is a Roland Hayes that wanted to perform at Wichita High School and had some interference from the Ku Klux Klan. They weren't successful. He did perform, but it was after going through some heartbreak and disappointment, all right? This is just a program. This, of course, is the implied music. I mean, it wasn't a shabby business. This is Margery Kelly King around 1953. The piano is still around, is it not? We won't go there. This is Miss King again. This is Burley Hayes School of Music Choral Ensemble. Okay. All right. Okay, one last thing to do, and I will take my seat. Whitney Young Jr., who was at one time the executive director of the National Urban League. He was also president of the National Conference of Social Welfare. And he was also my fraternity brother. He came to Wichita one year as a guest speaker for the annual dinner of the Urban League. And he was a very soft-spoken man, one of the big six during the turbulent days in this country. And in 1971, he wrote these words: "May the truth that makes us free, the hope that never dies, and the love that casts out fear lead us forward together. While we toil amidst these many things as they are, may our visions of things yet to be lead us on and strengthen us." You all have been very kind. Thank you so much.